There seems to be confusion in the gun control, gun rights community around what the definition that you brought forward actually means. And it's particularly around the terminology for design. That it's the guns that would be prohibited
the
would
magazine
be designed
capacity.
to have a detachable magazine of 5
for which it
rounds
was
or more.
originally designed.
Can
yeah.
you, but that's exactly it. So the legal definition that you proposed does not say originally designed, it says design. And so people think that it would ban virtually all semi-automatic centerfire rifles because all of them have these aftermarket magazines.
Yeah.
Can you please clarify if it's intended to be originally designed, i.e. the original design of that gun, and therefore much more restricted? Can you please clarify that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you are touching on one of the real intricacies around the language which constitutes the evergreen provision, which is designed, the rationale of the evergreen provision is to move forward with a model agnostic approach around creating a zone that is going to capture prohibited assault-style rifles. And we think that by having this provision in place, 2 very positive objectives will be reached. The first is that you move away from cherry-picking models, which can be politicized, and obviously, as you heard me say yesterday, we want to take the politics out of this. We want to bring the temperature down and have a responsible, civilized debate, which is based on facts, as opposed to fear or disinformation. And the second thing is that by entrenching this evergreen provision into the law, as opposed to just using an administrative instrument like the order in council, it will have a more enduring and lasting effect so that future governments who may have a different view.
Can you answer the question on the definition? Are you going to change it to say originally designed?
So I don't want to preempt the work of the committee, okay?
But what is your government's intention? That's the question. Is your government's intention to ban virtually all semi-automatic centerfire rifles, or is it to ban the ones that are more restricted through the additional word of originally designed?
Well, so again, I don't want to preempt the work of the committee. The committee is studying the definition. They're hearing from experts on how we have created those objective criteria. So, for example, muzzle force, the bore diameter, the semi-automatic.
You're not preempting the work of a committee to say what your government's intent was, though. I'm asking if you can clarify the intent.
And we want to be sure that we get the language completely aligned with the intent.
What is the intent?
I'm describing what the criteria are, including the last one around magazine cartridge capacity to be eligible for the receipt by the gun. So that is precisely what we're moving forward with.
But is it originally designed or is it not? What is the intent?
I believe that the intent is originally designed and making sure that we get clarification about that, but I also don't want to preempt the evidence that will come forward by experts in law enforcement who have looked at these objective criteria to make sure that we get the parameters.
And just on that list,
I'll come back to you.
Minister, on the list of fires, can you also...
I'll come back, Mary. I just want to give a chance here.
Are your lawyers looking at what to do if Alberta does invoke a sovereignty act to fight against the gun ban bill? Because it looks like they're about to do that in a few minutes.
Well, so let me say what I said in French a little bit earlier. In the first instance, Bill C-21's goal is to reduce gun violence with common sense policies like the national handgun freeze, red flag, yellow flag protocols, additional tools for law enforcement to go after hardened gun traffickers. There's a lot of good policy that has been informed by the advice and the consultation that we've had from law enforcement, from industry leaders, from Canadians across the spectrum. With regards to Alberta, we'll wait and see what they say, but it has been a resolved matter of Supreme Court jurisprudence that when it comes to the regulation of firearms, that falls within the jurisdiction of the federal government. And we obviously cooperate with the provinces and territories on an array of public safety priorities, including with Alberta.
Minister, on the list, you said particularly that you're not cherry picking, that this whole idea of this quote-unquote evergreen
to move away from that idea.
To move away from it, except at the same time, you are taking a list that's in regulations, putting it in legislation, admitting it's done to constrain future parliaments, and you're adding more guns onto it. So you are still cherry picking at the same time that you're saying you're not, and that this definition is supposed to move away from it. Can you explain why? Okay,
so in the first case, there are lists of guns that have been prohibited for years.
Through regulations.
Through regulations, correct. And the idea is to not depart from that standard because, and those decisions, because they have been in place in some cases going back to the 1990s and then more recently in 2020. And so to depart from that obviously would create confusion. We don't want to do that. So those lists are there. They will be entrenched in the law, and there will be clarity about that. There won't be any ambiguity about which guns are prohibited under those lists. If I could just be permitted to finish, because I'm trying to be responsive to your question, Marika. The point of the evergreen is to move away from that practice and to alleviate some of the pressure on officials and experts to revisit this every year or every 2 years, or sometimes arbitrarily even longer than that, and to rather have some more efficiency around how it is that we prohibit guns which are too dangerous to be in our neighborhoods, in our streets. And that is the point around creating those criteria.
I understand that. My question was, why are you at the same time adding new guns that don't even fall under this definition that you've created? That's supposed to be the clear legal delineation between what is allowed and what is not. You are putting the listed ones that have been previously listed into law, but you are also adding new ones to that list. And I don't understand why that was done if the whole point of a definition is to get away from the cherry picking that you just identified.
Yeah, no, look, it's a fair point.
But why then? Explain.
I'm going to explain. We are taking some transitional steps by also having a list, but to move away, not overnight, not all in one fell swoop,
why would
but
a transitional
rather
step become law? If it's a transitional step, you wouldn't put it in legislation.
To have clarity around those additional models which may, in our judgment, be too dangerous to be left in the community. That's why.
But they don't meet the definition that you've created.
Well, I've given you an answer. My point is that it is not a binary system, right? We want to create the transition, and by having a list which is very clear and transparent, and by also moving towards an evergreen definition, we are making the transition over time to alleviate the pressure on officials to consistently and constantly have to revisit it. Did you want to ask anything, or are you just here to watch? Okay, thanks, Marika.
Watching the show.
Okay, thanks very much.
On Alberta, just one last question on Alberta. Where does this leave the RCMP in the sense you have two competing jurisdictions battling over these gun bans, and could this create more public safety concerns if they have to deal with confiscating guns while you have one jurisdiction saying no, this isn't constitutional, and the federal government saying yes, we can do this?
Look, I am confident that the Supreme Court has examined this question around federal jurisdiction over the regulation of firearms. It's well-settled law now for about 20 or something, maybe approaching 22 years now, that the question of how it is that we create rules around gun regulation falls within the jurisdiction of the federal government. That's precisely what C-21 is. It is a piece of federal legislation that is proposed to become law that is about the regulation of firearms. Insofar as how we implement it, we'll maintain a very robust dialogue with all of our provinces and territories, including Alberta, so that we can make sure that that policy does what it's intended to do, which is to keep our communities safe from gun crime.